Okay, everybody, we're going to get started today. We're going to move on to our next section. Please, everybody. We're going to move on to our next section. We're going to start talking about materialism. But before I do, I want everybody to get out a piece of paper. I want you to do two things for me. I want you to write down what is materialism to you, and then I want you to rank each one of these things in level of deviance. Meaning, which one is the number of, like, if you think selfishness is the worst and most deviant of these descriptive words or characteristics that people can have, put a 1 here. And if you think hedonism, second, put it here. Okay? If you're unclear of the definitions, let's don't rank them. Talk about each one of them. Okay, so give me some ideas, some semblance. It doesn't have to be the most correct or complete definition ever. And don't give me the John Kerry version either, which is about 5 pages long. And I'd like to make an addendum to my last statement. Oh, most politicians know. Santorum. No. It's just a sort of a class exercise here. Watch out for the table. I'm not sure which one. Might walk away or something. The table walks away. So again, while you're writing, again, if you had any issues with the test, let me know after class. We'll try to deal with them. Hopefully most people, especially those of you, most of you are a little bit higher up in class, so you're like juniors and seniors, so you know how to do this, a lot of you. But again, if you had any issues with it, let me know. Everybody has to upload these tests. It probably shouldn't be a problem with plagiarism, because unless you're going to one of the other schools that I taught this class this way at, I don't think you're going to be able to find any resources online. Although I'm sure there's plenty of essays on Hitler. So, anyway, plenty of them. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about these concepts. We're going to define what materialism is. I gave you guys a bit of a break today. Chapter 1 was how long? Thank you. So, which shows you, hopefully when you guys looked it up, you said, I'm sure some of you are like, oh man, I'm going to have to read this on top of what I'm doing in the test, until you saw it was 4 pages, and it's like, it should have taken more than 10 minutes to read it. You could have read it 5 times in 10 minutes if you're fast enough. So. Anyway, but I like actually starting this out slow, because there's actually a lot in those 4 pages. There actually is. Kasser, I think, does an excellent job of putting a lot of ideas into a very small book. I want to say this is what, it's barely 100 pages long. A little over. Barring the epilogue, 115 pages. So, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually read extensively from the foreword today, and whatever time we have left, I'm going to show you part of this documentary called Affluenza, which I like, but it's a little hokey. It comes across like a caricature or something. All right, anybody still working on the rankings?
Yeah, I'm working.
All right. Jeff?
Can you just, real quick, what is hedonism?
Hedonism is an obsession with physical pleasure, mainly. Or at least pleasure. It doesn't have to, it could be mental pleasure. It could be drugs, right? But hedonistic, there's actually a resort called Hedonism 3 or something like that, where supposedly it's basically just nude all the time, and people have sex in the hot tub. And I think Playboy has a show or something based on it. Yeah.
Do you know where that is?
I think it's in the Bahamas or the Caribbean somewhere in there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places like that now. There's like Amsterdam's that way, Ibiza's that way. There's hedonistic tourism. I would say that's what Vegas is. People don't go to Vegas to like read the Bible and do charity. Well, some people do, but most people don't go to Vegas to not have a good time. To sit in their hotel room and go, you know what? I'm not really into gambling or prostitutes or strippers or anything, or drugs. So I'm just going to stay here in the hotel room in my Super 8. I don't think that's why people go to Las Vegas. People go to Las Vegas to act, the same reason why they go to spring break, to act like complete fools, to have sex with strangers, to do drugs they've never heard of in their life, and then probably come back with syphilis and a drug addiction problem. You know, maybe someone wanted pregnancies. Who knows?
What if I'm dealing with this?
Huh?
What is the rate? Which one is more deal?
Yeah, just rank them. Like, what do you think? Like, 1 being the worst, and then on down the list. Jeff?
Did you hear about that shooting today in Ohio?
I saw something about it, but I haven't seen any of the details. So. All right, while you guys are still ranking this, let's get to... So somebody give me a definition of what materialism is. And in your definition, tell me, are you defining this in a deviant way, in what way? Because a lot of people don't think there's anything wrong with materialism. And frankly, if you weren't at least mildly materialistic, wouldn't there be problems? I mean, at the very minimum, if you were a truly unmaterialistic person, you probably wouldn't take a shower and you wouldn't eat and a whole bunch of other stuff. There are people who go out into the wilderness and take a vow of poverty and silence and don't contact anybody. People just drop food off for them and they do nothing but meditate. And the idea is to get rid of the ego and elevate. So somebody give me a definition of materialism. Patrick.
The act of buying objects, things to create a notion of happiness and neglecting the needs and obligations, all that they need to do for them, like their family and themselves.
Okay, so you got a couple elements there. So read it to me slower again. Read the first part.
Okay, materialism is the act of buying objects and things to create a notion of happiness.
Okay, so it's this element of collecting objects instead of friends or family or experiences. It's more about a car because I want it, not because I necessarily need it. So there's some instance of that to be materialistic is to want more than you need. So that seems inherent. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but go ahead, read the rest.
And is neglecting their obligations and duties to fulfill like, needs and like family obligations that they fulfill on a daily basis.
So ignoring other aspects of people's lives, for example, emotional fulfillment or love or anything like this, that it impacts people's goals and their focus. Where most people, if their son got into an accident on Thursday night, and hopefully they weren't drinking, it wasn't their fault, would be more concerned about their health, their son's health and well-being than you wrecked my $80,000 Mercedes. Whereas a materialistic person would be like, they might even feign, like, are you okay, son? As soon as he's okay, damn it, look what you did to my car, kind of stuff. This is materialistic people. And again, I think most people probably have materialistic moments or materialistic elements to their personality. Like, for example, my mother, who was not an overtly materialistic person, but was somewhat was a penny pincher, I would say. But that was because early on in her life, she was on welfare after she got divorced. And that time of thing impacts you, and money takes on a different attitude. One time, my stepbrother, we were kind of wrestling in the back of the van, and he hit me in the mouth, and I started bleeding from my lips. And my mom was concerned about the fact that she had not Scotch guarded the upholstery in the van and not to bleed on the van. That's what her main concern was. And I remember that was a moment where I, for that moment, lost faith in my mother's understanding of reality. That she was more concerned about the stupid van, which, by the way, they sold a couple of months later anyway. Maybe that's why. I don't know. But I never took that as, oh my God, my mother is an unrepentant materialist. I better get out of this home. And I didn't call protective services. But one of the issues is that maybe the level of materialism in America is so intense, but it's so common that most people don't realize it. The way if you were in a leper colony, you wouldn't think anything of it if someone's arm fell off. That wouldn't be a big deal. That if everybody had syphilis, it would no longer be a disease. Because everybody would have it. And again, but you could actually look at it saying, well, people would still be sick. So you don't tell me that maybe just because everybody's arm is just like if everybody smoked crack, it would still be wrong. It would in the minds of some people, even if they were doing it, because nothing would get done. Society would potentially start to fall apart. So it's about values, valuing material things. It's about collecting material things. What else? Anybody else? Give me another definition. Jeff.
Using material goods in defining your socioeconomic status.
Okay, so it's about presentation of your class level or your own personal reputation. That this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to show it. I wouldn't be me if I didn't have a Ferrari, or sometimes it's reverse. I wouldn't be me if I didn't drive around this beat up Volkswagen. That it can be working in reverse. And sometimes, just because you're materialistic doesn't mean you like luxurious things. Are people who are hoarders materialistic? But they don't like nice things usually. Okay, it's disgusting stuff. They won't throw food away, or like TV dinner containers. I've seen these. One of my friends was. I would call him. He was on the road to getting on the show. His biggest problem. Well, I'm not sure what happened, but I remember going over to his house, and he lived in Alaska, and he won't see this. for some reason there was no carpet on his floor. And I didn't even want to ask why. He told me, don't go in the bathroom, you don't even want to see what's going on in there. By the kitchen sink, there was stacked up to here TV dinner containers. I'm not kidding. In like old, and I'm sitting there going, look, it would take you about, and I wasn't going to do it for him, but I was like, it would take you about 20 minutes to take that outside to the trash. Now, part of the issue was where he was living, there was not regular trash service the way you know it. Because he lived out in sort of in a small neighborhood out in Alaska, and I don't think you guys understand Alaska. Most of you don't understand what we're talking about. If you lived in rural Montana, you know what I'm talking, or Wyoming, you know what I'm talking about. There's no trash truck coming down the street. You know? You're lucky if any car can get down the street at certain points in time in Alaska. You're out on your own. So most people just take their trash over to the local dumpster at 7-Eleven and throw it in there and stuff. So he did have partly that excuse, but he was on the road to getting out of control. And if we have time, or I might do this as a participation assignment or something, maybe an optional assignment. I don't like to use that word extra credit. Optional assignment if you want to gain back some participation points if you missed a class, to watch one of these horror shows. And give me a critical analysis of what's wrong with these people. Because again, there are materialists who they won't drink anything but Evian water or something, or the Fiji water. Which, by the way, they say that's like good for the environment. The distance it takes to travel there from Fiji to the United States destroys any kind of environmental benefit that it has, and it's still made out of plastic. So, but then there's other people who, you know, they have one object that they love to death, and they won't get rid of it no matter how bad it is, whether it's some old car that they've had for a long time, or some people get weird like this. Maybe they had long hair at once and they cut it off and they keep the ponytail. That's how, and one of the interesting things, that shows you the diversity of materialism. That it can mean something like only wanting Cartier stuff or Rolex watches, and it can mean collecting old milk cartons and eggshells that you broke up. Or sometimes it comes in, and I don't know if this is materialism, this is maybe more of hoarding stuff, but like people who start collecting pets. This starts to become a material reality for them. This isn't, because the conditions in the house get worse than the animal shelter.
They have a show on Animal Planet called Pet Hoarding or something.
Right. And again, and these people, they'll tell you. They're like, they're like, if you're squeamish, don't come over to my house. That's the kind of stuff they say. And I'm sure every neighborhood has the crazy cat woman who's got 500 cats, and the health department has to come in because she got hepatitis or something from one of the... You know, like the smell is like destroying the walls of the house. You know, I mean, that's how intense it is. But this is a form of materialism, and it's this element of it. It's the possessiveness. And this can come out like one of the areas of, and maybe I'm blowing up your little the definitions that you guys have. But one of the areas of concern of that materialism causes is not just the hoarding and maybe being overly shallow and all these other, or being greedy, or ignoring other people's feelings. It's a sense of possessiveness when it comes out in romantic relationships. This is a very dangerous thing. This can lead to murder and things like that. You could probably put jealousy. Jealousy is a characteristic that many materialistic people have. Certainly envy. Materialistic people are many times very envious. The high-end materialistic people, not the people collecting old milk cartons. Like you could say, look, homeless people that carry around shopping carts with all this junk attached to it. It's a form of sort of materialism that these are their own possessions. Some of it is cans, because they're... But here, I always see homeless people, and their whole cart's full of cans, and they don't go over to the place to exchange the cans. So...
You usually get paid for turning in cans.
You do, like 5 to 10 cents. So there is a point to it, but I've seen them walking around with this bags of cans, and this is the same homeless person I've seen for 3 weeks, carrying some cans around. So God knows what's going on there. But possessiveness, if you've ever dated or known somebody who's dated a possessive person, this can be a very frightening reality. I had a student one time who told me she had to miss class once because she had to call the police on her boyfriend because he was stalking her. Yeah, and he couldn't. She broke up with him, and he couldn't let it go. It just drove him crazy. So anyway, but maybe, you know, and the possessive people are, it's much more than that. It's things as well as people, and even somebody they really like and they're possessive with. If you touch one of their things that they don't want you to touch or move stuff, it's on. I mean, it's a straight out war. And again, materialistic have these issues. But again, one of the things we got to ask ourselves, is all of materialism bad? Is all of these emotions we attach to material things bad? Because look, we live, to quote Madonna, in a material world. This wall ain't going nowhere just because I imagine it not to be there. Okay, I can't imagine myself with $5 billion in the bank and it suddenly shows up. We live in a real world where you need food, you need water, you need shelter, you need... Some people don't think you need clothes, but most people think you need clothes. Not a hedonism. So, anyway, there's one other thing. So, if you ask some nudists, some of them do it because they're perverts, and they like to just hang around, and they like people. They're voyeurs and they're exhibitionists. They like to look at other naked people, and they like other people looking at them while they're naked. And they make fun of this in this movie I haven't seen. It's called Wanderlust with Jennifer Aniston. But some nudists will tell you one of the reasons why that they're nudists is that clothes create class differences and divisions between people. And clothes lead to more possessions. And I've talked to a few homeless people that said, look, I don't want a house. I don't want all these things you have. These things tie you up inside and stress you out. But again, homeless people don't exactly live their life. All right? So anyway, did you want to add something?
Well, I was going to say something on possessiveness. When we were doing roof checks on our end, one of the buildings, and somebody actually, like, we had to confiscate something, and somebody actually charged us because he didn't want us taking our thing. Like, obviously.
When he charged you, like, ran at you?
Ran at us, like, out of his room and ran at us. Trying to tackle us.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I actually had an instance when I was an RA where, and I don't know what this kid was up to, but you probably do this, it was winter break, and we go in and check everybody's room when they're not there to make sure there's no candles. I hate to tell you, people in the dorms, this is what goes on, okay? I was always somebody who respected people's, I didn't open drawers and things. We just looked for things out in the open. Or some people had pets, and frankly, you know what? I hate to tell you this, but I let people on my floor have like gerbils and hamsters. I didn't see any big deal about it. I just didn't see, and it wasn't worth the nonsense of turning someone in for a hamster or something. Unless Richard Gere came over, and then it would be a serious problem, potentially. Yeah, see, you guys have heard the story too. And it's been repeated too many times to not be true. Just anybody who's got an iPad, look it up. You don't know the story?
No.
Look it up later, because I don't want to describe it. Anyway, I believe he was in New York at the time when it happened. So anyway, but in general, but this one young man, and he had a lot of computer equipment in his room, and I think he was up to something, hacking into something or something. I don't know what he was doing. Maybe he thought we were going to steal his box of Twinkies. I don't know what it was. But he wouldn't want to. He said, "Can you check the room while I'm not here, or while I'm here, because I don't trust you guys," like that kind of stuff. And my the RD, the guy who was my boss, goes, "Oh," he looked in there and said, "Okay, it's cool." And then when the kid left, he goes, "We'll go in there later." So that's all he switched around. I only spent 2 semesters as an RA because that stuff really kind of. The progressive nature of that stuff kind of bothered me, but I was the cool RA, so anyway, that was my goal. My goal to be an RA was to stop the nonsense that most RAs did. So, but I still, I was not somebody who would let people overtly break the rules and things like that. But I knew RAs that would try and set up stings and catch students drinking, and I remember telling them, I'm like, look, you're in your room. You're drinking? You ain't making any noise? Looks like you got away with it.
That's like my hallway smells like marijuana the entire day. I know where it's coming from, but I mean.
Oh, the cops will, at Stony Brook, the cops will sit in the hallways and just sit there. I almost think that they're just getting contact or something. Might as well. I mean, it's got to be boring being a cop in the suburbs. You know what I mean? But you're gonna call it some husband and wife, older husband and wife, are fighting over the orthopedic bath pillow. I mean, that's what you're gonna get. Some house party on Friday night, and not Project X or something like that. Yeah. Somebody tears someone's shirt off at a bar. I mean, that's what goes on in Suffolk County. And then every once in a while, you get the dead body that rolls up on Gilgo Beach or something. I was thinking about making a YouTube video admitting that I was the serial, but I thought
That's a bad idea.
I know. I was going to put fiction. I was going to put fiction because I was going to like profile them, but you know they would come in arrest. This guy just admitted he was a Go-Go Beach killer. Anyway, all right. Let's get to your rankings. So, somebody want to volunteer their rankings here? Yes, go ahead. What did you put number one? Well, let's do your first top four.
Top four, 1 through 4, is greed, narcissism.
Greed's number one.
Yeah, narcissism,
Number two.
hedonism, and vanity.
Why'd you put vanity above selfishness?
Selfish, because I.
Did you have selfishness as 5?
Yeah, I did have it as 5. Or I had self-centeredness as 5.
Maybe this is 6.
Actually, selfishness is 7.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's hard because all these kind of mix in with materialism.
Well, they are. They're interrelated, but I think
Yeah.
that they're separate characters.
So I had vanity as 4. Is that what you asked?
Yeah. Because vanity. Tell me what your definition of vanity is.
Oh, my definition of vanity are things materials that improve, make you feel good about yourself, like vanity, such as.
So you see this almost as a positive.
No, I mean, a little bit's positive, but if you take it to an obsession, like I wrote materialism.
So what would be an example of a vain person? And why would they be dangerous?
They have to have multiple cars, multiple homes, a lot, excessive amounts of things that make them look good. Because vanity is about how you look.
Right, and vain people are often are very shallow.
Yeah.
And one of the things that occurs with vain people is because their entire existence and their identity is tied up in their looks. When they have a bad hair day, or there was a supermodel who some guy cut her face with razors, and if you're an overly vain person, that's the end of your world, right? You know, if you've seen pictures of this woman, her face is destroyed. I mean, huh? No, there was some guys.
No, I know what you're talking about, but in addition, like the supermodel that turned around into an airplane propeller.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and if you're a well-grounded person and you still have money from your modeling gigs, and or maybe you're going to get money from the settlement, unless you ignorantly walked into a. I mean, they're not going to pay you because you were dumb. But if you're a well-grounded person and you got people around you that are decent in your life, and many shallow, vain people don't have decent people around them, they have these yes people, the entourage thing, then you should be able to handle it. It will be rough, but you should be able to handle it. I would say if you take someone like Christopher Reeve, he was reported to have suicidal thoughts repeatedly. I don't necessarily think that's vanity, maybe, other than because what happened to him was way more than just looks. Right, so again, major things can happen, and it's a terrible thing if you get your face cut up. It's not just some vain thing, but it can be. Yes, in the back. Tell me your name.
Camille.
Go ahead, Camille.
I put selfishness first.
Okay.
Then narcissism. Then greed and possessiveness.
All right. So why'd you put selfishness number 1, especially above narcissism? After what we just talked about with Hitler.
I know.
Is it just because maybe narcissism is not as prevalent?
No, I just think selfish people are more likely to be sneaky to get their way, and I think.
Do you think selfishness also is like a precursor to narcissism?
Yeah.
Like it has to exist first. So if there's a low level of selfishness in individuals in a society, they're less likely to become narcissistic or dangerously narcissistic.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to comment? The possessiveness, is this due to relationships and stuff, maybe?
I think it's serious, but I just don't think it's that serious.
Okay. What about greed?
I kind of tied that in with selfishness a little bit, so it was just more good.
And I'll tell you right now, was it you to put greed number 1? Why did you do that?
Because I feel like with materialism, these are things that are bought with money.
Right.
And things, and so
here's the other issue. Remember I asked you, Deviants, what does greed do to some people's personality or sense of morality?
It'll change the way you think.
Right, I don't think...
The more you want, it's going to totally
and
change the way you think.
it never seems... And with greed in the minds of many people seems to be a bottomless pit.
Right.
Where once you start down this path, we call this affluenza, or keeping up with the Joneses, where people are so upset, like, it's... At first, maybe I wanted to be a millionaire. And then I got to a millionaire, and I went to Aspen, and the billionaires were making fun of me.
Yeah.
And I got 100 million, but that still ain't enough. Now I got 30 billion. That still ain't enough.
I read
And
this.
it seems to never stop. And if Bernie Madoff had not been greedy, he wouldn't have come close. He could have. Here's the sick thing about Bernie Madoff. He was the president of the NASDAQ stock market at one point. He had a successful business before he started doing this. He could have easily lived a very comfortable, no, he wouldn't maybe not have had a house in Montauk. He could have lived a very comfortable life in a beautiful apartment in Manhattan with a great family. And instead, he built people out of $50 billion. One of his sons hung himself. And now he's in jail for 140 years, which is essentially a death sentence. And his wife doesn't want to talk to him no more. And look, and if you're a Mets fan, thanks a lot, Bernie, right? I mean, your team's screwed for the next 5 or 6 years unless the Wilpons sell his team, which I don't understand why Major League Baseball forced the Dodgers to be sold, but not the Mets. I don't see
The guy in Westchester should just buy him outright.
Yeah, it's just nonsense. And I'll tell you right now, again, if you're a Mets fan, the greed is eating your team alive. So this isn't some little thing, right?
I read this story a little while ago about this German, I believe he was German or Austrian billionaire who had a net worth of like $12 billion, and he lost $3 billion of it, so he went down to 9, and he killed himself.
Yeah,
So
see?
he's so
I mean,
unhappy.
and that's horrible to lose $3 billion.
And you have 9.
Yeah, I mean, it's
like,
bad enough losing a $20 bill on the ground. I can't imagine what it's like to lose $3 billion. But here's his problem.
Investments and stuff.
Right,
like
his
that, right?
greed and his shallowness and his vanity and the materialism prevented him from understanding that, first of all, he really didn't have that $3 billion. That was unrealized gain because obviously he lost it through some kind of stock deal or something like that.
Through investments. And
Yeah, so it technically was
yeah.
not cash. Secondarily, he could not wrap his mind around that he still had $9 billion.
He had to
Like,
kill himself. He thought
yeah.
that the world was over.
the absurdity of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you. You want the 1 through 4?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think greed is first. Self-centeredness is second. Narcissism is third. And shallowness is fourth.
And you notice, narcissism has scored every single time. Has anybody else had anything else scored every single time?
Greed.
Greed. And greed's up there too. Greed and narcissism seem to be closely related too, don't they? Okay, not always. I don't necessarily think Hitler was a greedy. He didn't seem like a greedy person, other than greedy for power, maybe would be a better way to put it. People can be greedy for other things. People can be greedy for sex, food, all kinds of stuff. It's a possessiveness. One of the big differences between possessiveness and greed is possessiveness, people are obsessed with maybe one thing and they want to hold on to it, like a woman or a man or a husband or an Oscar statue or something. Greed is, and it seems to be an insatiable lust for more and more. And again, hey, what does the church say about greed? Yeah. I'll tell you right now, I can't name a major religion that doesn't consider greed to be a serious issue, a moral failing.
It's one of the 10 commandments is do not covet.
Well, I'll tell you right now, even Buddhists, do you think Buddhists are greedy? They don't teach greed. Buddhism is actually quite an anti-materialistic religion. It teaches about, the guy who started it was a prince at one point, Siddhartha, and he sat beneath a Bodhi tree supposedly for like years. But anyway, to sort of try and figure out what's the point of life, because he kept thinking, you know what, I can eat and then 2 hours later I'm hungry again. I can have sex and then a little while later the feeling goes away. I can get drunk and then after a while the feeling goes away. I can accomplish things in the real world and eventually the promotions and accolades go away. He said, I want something permanent. And he came up with this idea of getting rid of the ego and throwing things off and burning these material things away to where your soul reaches enlightenment. Then he figured out, one of the ideas of Buddhism is that the cycle of birth and rebirth that takes place in the material world can be broken. And once you do, then you exist in this ethereal world where there's no food, there's no greed, there's no hunger, there's no pain, none of this crap. There's no limited nature of life. I think for human beings, it's very difficult for us to imagine a world where there's no food. And there's no need for water, and there's no, like your body has no temperature to it, like you're not cold and hot, or you don't feel physical pain. And that's what Buddhists sort of create in this world called nirvana, that you move away from all these things and you were liberated finally. And you can move anywhere at any time, and there's no time, there's no space, there's no limits. And I think it's hard for human beings who are all tied on to the earth by gravity and stuck in this frame where we need all these material things to exist or to imagine that. And imagining is part of the enlightenment process according to Buddhists. So, yeah?
So, just to clarify, Buddhists believe that you reach a point where you will evolve to the point where you don't feel pain, you don't feel hunger, you don't,
in the afterlife, not in this world. Not in this world.
I didn't hear you. Yeah.
No, but I'll tell you right now, they still believe that you can achieve a lot of that in this world if you meditate and you remain silent and you quiet your ego. That's why not all Buddhists do this. There's Buddhists who believe that you take your enlightenment and you try to make society better. There's other sects of Buddhists, the ascetics, who say, no, no, no. You've got to separate yourself. You've got to lose your name, your identity. You can't have a job. You can't speak. You can't have sex. You need to eat minimal amounts of food. All you need to do is do yoga and meditate on the ethereal nature of reality. And by doing that, even within the lifetime, you can get rid of these desires at the very minimum. That, you can hear this. Buddhism preaches freedom from desire. And materialism is a form of desire. All these things are sort of forms of that desire. And a Buddhist would look at this similarly as somebody who was Catholic or Protestant would look at this and say that this causes problems. Or a Muslim or in Judaism or Hindu. Yeah, I mean almost every religion, even though that well, let's take Christianity for example. There are many parts both in the Old and New Testament where God rewards people with great material things. New lamb or gold, or like David. He rewarded David for being a good servant by making him king, and he got tremendous riches. Or the story of Job, where God tests Job, takes everything away from him that he had, ruins his health.
Kills him, basically.
Right, and basically, and tries to see, God allows the devil to tempt Job, and eventually he gets through this process and is rewarded by 5 times as much stuff that he had before. So it's not that religion is still completely against material things. But it's certainly the obsession with material things, this idea of coveting things. Right.
Obsession with
Yes. Like coveting, one of the commandments is thou shalt not covet, thy neighbor's wife or whatever, which means lusting after. And people lust after objects the way they lust after people. Jeff?
I think it's hard to give like a definite order to each and every one of these because there's degrees of severity. Look at greed. I mean, even though that was in the top 4 of everybody's list, whether we like it or not, greed fuels capitalism, which is basically our economic system right now. And unless you guys want a government that pays for everything, we all have a limited salary, they provide housing, they provide healthcare, and basically socialism. If we remove greed from our economic system or remove greed from society in general, we'll have communism and socialism, and I think
I wouldn't go so far as to call it greed, but at least a recognition of the value of material things. You can have a society, I frankly think, if you actually read what Adam Smith said in The Wealth of Nations, he says that capitalism won't properly work like laissez-faire capitalism, where the government is essentially, the government sets the conditions and protects private property and lets everything else take place. Adam Smith said, well, you know what, if you have unscrupulous people, they are going to use their power, or because nobody starts at the same part as the starting line, right? I mean, look, it would make sense. The visible hand of supply and demand would work if everybody started at the same starting gate. But the problem is some people are out here, some people are back here, and these people up here are going to use their position to win the race before, or to get whatever they want first, and then dictate to everybody else. And what Adam Smith said was, if people don't have respect for each other's, and he was talking from a Christian perspective, their Christianity or their value system, or at least their innate sense that, hey, we're all God's creatures and we need to treat each other in a respectful manner based on that capitalism would get out of control. And if you actually look at what's been going on for the past 10 or 15 years in this country, he's almost exactly right, is that when the government steps away and pure greed is allowed to control the market, the bailout, the housing bubble crap, the dot-com bubble, the Enron scandals, the Bernie Madoff crap with the Met, all this stuff takes place because when you open the system up and you merely say, okay, this isn't illegal, but it's unethical, that what will happen is at least a certain percentage of those people in corporations will take the unethical road, and harm people. Remember, those of you in my social institutions class, I showed you the bit about how Enron was making fun of Grandma Millie in California, and they were screwing them out of electricity. Like, it was a big joke to them that people at Enron were ruining other people's lives and making millions of dollars doing it. And I assure you, when the stock market went from 14,000 or whatever the hell it was at to 1,600, 6,600, people made money all the way down. Because you can do that in the stock market. It's called shorting stocks. Like, if I think Apple's going to $200 and it's right now at $5, I'll short Apple, and then I'll buy it back at 200 and give it to the company that I shorted it from. That's the way it works. Or credit default swaps, where I can bet on whether or not Greece is going to fail. And not only can I bet on that, but I can make it happen. I can spread rumors. If I'm a big market player, I can put bets on one side or the other.
It's a gambling game.
And to invest, the stock market is, Las Vegas ain't got nothing.
Yeah.
The stock market, I'm telling you right now, I mean, you can get a system for blackjack. You can't get it's hard to get a system for stocks, although some people claim they do have one. So, anyway, all right, so anybody else want to share their rankings? How many people here had narcissism in your top 5? How many people have selfishness in your top 5? Self-centeredness in the top 5? Hedonism in the top 5? That's less. I find that.
Isn't that like the pleasuring yourself?
Well, I mean, that's one way. Hedonism is obsessed with physical pleasure, though.
Okay.
Somebody who's a hedonist would be like a nymphomaniac.
That's not deeping at all. That's not deeping it.
It can get that way.
It's therapeutic.
Well, here's the difference. Here's the difference. Somebody who is merely just engaging in a short-term hedonism might go to Las Vegas or something and do something they normally wouldn't do. I'm talking about hedonistic people that this is all they obsess about. Like they can't leave the house because they're too busy watching porno. That's a hedonist.
That's
right? Like they don't open the blinds because what they're doing they don't want the neighbors to see, or that all they do they spend 8 hours trolling some adult meetup site, right? Or I'm a swinger, that kind of stuff. Like key parties, or they'll do any drug that's put in front of them. Hedonistic people only care about one thing, and that's stimulating their pleasure zones. And the bad thing about this is some people's idea of pleasure is hurting other people.
Oh.
I mean, it's sadomasochism right there, isn't it? I mean, that's what that is. Or Hitler. Hitler's hedonistic pleasure was to harm people. He loved it. Okay? Consequently, you notice that he didn't have a lot of sex. Or at least from the documentaries, it didn't appear that he was into that type of physical pleasure, was he? And also, if you remember the High Hitler episode that I asked you guys to watch, how much physical pain was the man in? I mean, a lot. He had all kinds of sores on his legs, supposedly from syphilis.
He said he had Parkinson's or something.
Well, that might have been caused by the later stages of syphilis. He had sores all over his body. He had constant stomach pain. He was simultaneously taking laxatives, so he wouldn't have to eat certain foods. And then he was taking stuff he was taking sleeping pills or something. And then he was taking laxatives, so it was clenching his stomach up and then unclenching it. So he was and the more monumental his decisions got, supposedly the more his pain developed. And you saw him, he was on drugs pretty heavily too. Methamphetamines, procaine, cocaine, all this stuff. He actually supposedly injected one of the countries that he took over, I can't remember what it was, the leader of the country, or I think it was a Romanian leader, and he passed out, and Hitler had his doctor inject him. Yeah. And he said that he made him too lively, and he's like, Hitler was like, I'm going to kick this guy's butt and shut him up or something like that. So, anyway, how about vanity? Who had that in the top 5? You need to listen to Carly Simon's song. Shallowness. That's the shallow how kind of thing. And shallow people are usually vain. Greed. Possessiveness. Which one of these is most closely related to crime?
Greed.
Probably this one too, right? Selfishness, right? I don't think serial killers are too concerned about how other people think when they kill them, for the most part. Right? I don't think armed robbers are worried about someone's feelings when they stick guns in people's faces and make people wet their pants or whatever it is. Although, I'll tell you what, you rob one of these bodegas, you better be wearing a bulletproof vest. These guys are ready. They got shotguns under the counter and stuff like that. So, anyway. All right. So, Why is materialism deviant? And maybe you can, in that question, or is it? So answer either one of those questions. So what's the issue with materialism here? Is it just an element of being extremely materialistic, or are there certain elements of materialism that can be considered to be not really that deviant, or is it maybe just an element of what the culture considers to be normal, or a combination of all these things? Like, for example, in a lot of very poor countries, to be materialistic is considered to be like a horrible, horrible thing. Okay?
I think it's, a part. It depends upon where you grow up. I mean, in Middle America, a nice car is, a Ram 1500 quad cab with a, extended bed. A nice car around here is a $250,000 Lamborghini. I mean,
well, maybe $80,000 Mercedes.
Either way, I mean, it depends upon where you grew up and what definitions we give certain materials. I mean, around here, materialism is pretty common. But does it make it right? No, but who really cares? Because it makes life.
So partly you're saying, look, if somebody wants to be materialistic and they're not hurting me, who cares, right?
Yeah.
Who cares? Are they harming society in any way?
They're changing the outside perception.
Let me go ahead. Tell me your name again. I'm sorry.
Alex.
Go ahead, Alex.
You were asking.
Go ahead.
If
No, go ahead. Answer that question.
Okay, so why is it deviant? It can be. It all has to do with the person. Like, everyone is materialistic to the point.
Right. I mean, one of the points I'm
having
making.
material things.
Look, if you weren't materialistic, you probably wouldn't comb your hair or take a bath, and then you would die pretty quickly.
Have this computer or something like that. But when it becomes an obsession to the point where you constantly need more and more to be happy.
Where's the line, do you think? When do you know you're getting into trouble with materialism? What stuff starts to happen? What does it? It's sort of maybe like a drug addiction. What starts to happen?
You start to lose things that are important to you, like you ignore your family.
Unless they're with you with the material.
Yeah. You ignore your job. You ignore things. You ignore responsibilities.
Or maybe you don't ignore your job, but you only see it as a way to get
money, so you can buy more material.
So maybe you take a miserable job that you hate because it pays $250,000 a year instead of taking a job you love because it only pays $50,000.
And also, you're saying about society. Is it judgmental society? But I feel that American society is based on materialism. Capitalism is materialism.
And that's why I put the materialism in institutions. Certainly, capitalism encourages a certain amount of materialism. It doesn't work without it.
People come to the United States to make more money and have more things.
Yeah, I don't think they come
we're
here.
We're based on some sort of materialistic that could be deviant. We're a country that constantly, or people, society that constantly wants more.
And the original,
we're not happy with like the medium. We want more and more and more, and we see people with we focus on celebrities and all the things they have, and so we watch that and we want that too, and it can become like kind of a game that can become deviant.
So you can be normalized. And one of the things, what was it, the Declaration or the Constitution? It said life, liberty, and it used to be the pursuit of property.
It was.
And then they changed it to happiness, almost equating happiness to property. And one of the ideas of the American dream is the liberty to go out and get your own land and build your own house, right? And start your own business, right? And I'll tell you right now, Mexican immigrants aren't trying to come to this country because they think they're going to be well accepted in white society. I can assure you of that. They come in here because they need money, and Mexico is a poor, broken economy and government. I mean, their government is... Why do you think people? Do you think people are trafficking drugs in Mexico because they think it's a good job? I mean, clearly it's not, but it's got a lot of money to it. Gangs too. I mean, why would you join a gang? Go ahead. Do you have one? Anybody else besides other people who have talked? Yeah.
But you could also say that materialism, because it pretty much fuels capitalism. You're talking about fascists, they view capitalism as a necessity to get the ultimate goal of communism.
So you can see that as a positive.
You see it any way, no matter what.
But Marx also said that it would cause a great deal of disruption before you would get there. The one thing, let's look at.
It is.
All right, so let's look at some social problems that people consider to be serious that potentially might be caused. So are wars caused by overly materialistic focus sometimes? Wars for oil, land. How about crime? Is that caused by materialism sometimes? How about environmental damage? Right? There's 2 big balls of plastic in the ocean. Right? And one of the interesting things is, why didn't we recycle earlier?
We weren't smart enough to figure it out.
Well, part of that, you know what the main reason is the same reason why we don't use solar panels for our cars. Is you can't make any money off of it, so why do it? And until the government, you notice when you put your little orange can out there, a subcontracted out person in a truck comes and gets it, but who's really paying for that is the city. The city or the county or the state is paying for that. Like in Arizona where my dad lives, they don't even have recycling. They're not interested in that. Partly, if they're recycling glass, it doesn't make sense. Glass is made out of sand. If you've ever been to Arizona, it's nothing but sand. Although you have to get the scorpions. So, I'm telling you, my sister found that she got bit by a scorpion in her shoe. You have to check your shoes in the morning. It's not a game.
I was just talking about one of my
Yeah, and frankly, if you go to parts of Georgia, rural Georgia, it's almost as dangerous. You wouldn't think there'd be scorpions in Georgia, but there are. Yeah, so it's crazy. So, what about the national debt? Surely that was not caused by materialism, right?
That was caused by a war, which was turned to caused by.
That was caused by a lot of different factors, but certainly some people would say materialism is part of it. Okay, and the bank bailout and all this other stuff. So there are some serious issues, and we will talk not only about social aspects, social problems that may be exacerbated or caused by materialism, but just as importantly, because I want to read this part out of the book here. And we'll get next time into chapter 2 and talk about, and we'll talk about some of these definitions that the book talks about. But listen to what Kasser is doing here. This is in the foreword. So not only the social problems, but also he looks at, just as importantly, social psychological issues that are connected with materialism. Things like unhappiness, depression, loneliness, suicide, murder, all these types of things that, obviously are much larger social trends, but we can boil them down to the social psychological level. So on page 10 of the foreword, or X, whatever, perhaps the most insidious aspect of the modern measure of worth is that it is not simply about having enough, but about having more than others do. That is, feelings of personal worth are based on how one's pile of money and possession compares with that of others. That's that affluenza stuff. Both those who surround us in real life and those seen only in the pseudo-realities of television and movies. In this context, so in this way, the media becomes a reference group for materialistic people, or just materialism in general, that like shows like the Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, Cribs, all this stuff, right? Isn't there one called My Sweet 16 where it's wealthy girls having these enormous parties? There was a story, there was a reality show about the Jenner kids, which by the way don't live with Bruce Jenner. I don't know why. I love it. He's raising 3 daughters that aren't his. Is there 3 Kardashians or is there 4? There's 4, my God. Well, anyway, we need to deport one of them. Anyway. Are there only 3 of them? 3 of them. Huh? Are there 4? Does the son act like a complete fool too? Are the Kardashians materialistic?
Yeah.
So, okay. And then you have other things, Paris Hilton, all these other people.
I was talking about the obsession with celebrities.
Right. That's certainly tied up in that. And what Marxists would say that celebrities, you're just a big billboard for Chanel and Juicy Couture and all this stuff. And look at the Oscars, the red carpet thing, right? Penelope Cruz didn't know anything about the dress she was wearing. And then she advertised her own clothing line. And she did look good. So anyway, she looked better when she was in Blow, which weighed 89 pounds. I don't know if she was actually doing coke as like part of the role or what.
I don't think the issue is necessarily materialism with that. I think that the issue is that even if you address these points with these social debutantes, they wouldn't care less because it basically.
What if somebody took everything away from them?
Well, yeah, but nobody's gonna, in this lifetime take everything away from them unless
we have another depression.
Yeah. But at the same time, like it's nice to have nice things. And
yeah, I mean, look,
nobody.
And that's a very American thing, and it's also somewhat though spread around the world. Is that look, you go to Russia and you're going to find one object in someone's house that they love, and usually has some kind of meaning to it. And it's usually not just something. Whereas Americans will show you their Beanie Baby collection. Start crying about it. And it's not that Americans don't have heirlooms. It's that many Americans don't trace their history back very far. It took me years to figure out what countries I even came from in Europe, let alone, you know, what kind of objects and things like that. So, but even stuff like let's take a look at somebody like if you look at the story from Tolkien about the hobbits. The hobbits were very materialistic, but they weren't obsessed with luxury things, right? You know, right? It's good drink and stuff like that. So things can have. It's what's tricky is that. All right, fine, I love something that's material, but it has an emotional attachment to me. Like when I see the Welsh flag, it's not just a piece of cloth. And some people see like I see the American flag too, or whatever, or whatever it is, you know. Or some people see the cross. I mean, somebody wearing a crucifix. It's a necklace and it's jewelry, but it means a lot more than that. So material things can have value beyond that. But I think Kasser here is talking more about some of the extreme aspects. So let me go on here. In this context, no one can ever have enough because aside from Bill Gates, and he probably still wants more, and by the way, he's not the richest man. I think his name is Carlos Slim. He's a Mexican media magnate. He's got like 70 billion. And the only reason why he's richer than Bill Gates is Gates' stock has went from $50-something a share to $26 a share. So his net worth was essentially... Yeah, and if he's like that... And the one thing about Gates is that even though he went to Harvard, and he's probably somewhat wealthy when he was younger, I think he understands what it's... When he dropped out of Harvard, I'm sure he wasn't rich. And I doubt his parents were bankrolling anything. And Steve Jobs, too. Steve Jobs and Wozniak were in a garage making Apple. And I think Steve Jobs... It probably explains his drive, because he was... But I assure you, if Jobs would have lost half his value, and Apple almost went out of business, he wouldn't have shot himself.
Google started in the garage too.
Right. So, anyway. Accordingly, at all levels of wealth, one can find individuals who crave ever more expensive toys, status symbols, and image builders, and who subjectively feel that they need more than they currently have, or need more than you need to survive. As advertising executives have known for decades, we become good consumers only when we experience more desires as urgent needs. I need an iPhone, not I want one, right? I need to see that movie, right? I need a brand new car. And you got one that works perfectly. And actually, the United States consumer economy, one of the things, and we're going to get into this when we talk about causes of materialism. I think I'll read a little bit more from the book and I'll show you part of this documentary. One of the things that happened after World War II, the United States only came out of essentially more than a 10-year depression, where unemployment was anywhere from 25 to 30%, and that was at a time when virtually no women were in the workforce. So the real unemployment rate was probably about 50 or 60%. The people who did not have jobs and had no way to get jobs and had no way to support themselves, whether it's their husband or whatever, or their fathers or whatever. And so it was a very serious shock to the system. It scared the hell out of people in the United States. Franklin Roosevelt couldn't solve the problem. The only thing that solved it was a horrendous war that cost tens of millions of lives that we went over before. And after the war ended, the United States, which had done very well by building up its military, the unemployment rate was basically zero, and women were in the workforce too. In order to go back to depression-level consumption, they said, you know what? We've got to figure out something to do with all this technology we developed during the war. So they made things like blenders, electric blenders, electric dishwashers. They made brand new cars. They also spread this idea that you need a new car every year. And for a while, Americans who had just come out of the Depression were very frugal, and they were like, wait, I'm not buying a new car unless my car is broken. And I know this is hard to believe because everybody just goes to the store and buys some stuff. Disposable stuff was the dumbest stuff in the world to Americans. They were like, disposable razor? I'm not buying that. That doesn't make any sense. What do you mean you use it 4 times and you throw it away? Or disposable lighters? No such thing existed. Everybody had Zippos and things like that. I still think it's probably potheads and crackheads that started disposable lighters. Supposedly, if you try to smoke weed with a Zippo, you suck in the butane, which probably can't taste very good. But anyway, so disposable stuff, and like TV dinners, all that stuff, that was weird to Americans. And it took an actual advertising campaign and cultural campaign to get Americans convinced that this is okay to do this. And they actually wrote a book called The Affluent Society that said this is how you live, right? And I'll tell you right now, in the 1950s, No other country on earth that ever existed in the history of man had higher living standards than America in the 1950s. Had more money, more opportunities, more luxuries. Although that we have a lot more technological advances now, people are, by real dollars, much poorer now. Whereas people could get by on a family of 4 on 1 salary. Now you can barely get by with 2 salaries with a family of 4. So things have changed a lot. And we'll talk about that. Anyway. So he goes on to say, it would be one thing if the promises of the consumer society were real, but they are not. At least that's their opinion here. And this is where the succinct but important book by Tim Kasser comes in. Kasser reviews a formidable body of research, that and we'll talk about what these scales are and how they measure materialism next time. Kasser reviews a formal body of research that highlights what for most of us is a quite common, counterintuitive fact. Even when people obtain more money in material goods, they do not become more satisfied with their lives or more psychologically healthy because of it. More specifically, once people are above poverty levels of income, gains in wealth have little or to no incremental payoff in terms of happiness or well-being. That's the P. Diddy song, More Money, More Problems. However, the central focus of Kasser's treatise, and what makes it new and different, is that merely aspiring to have greater wealth or more material possessions is likely to be associated with increased personal unhappiness. He documents that people with strong materialistic values and desires report more symptoms of anxiety and are at greater risk of depression and experience more frequent somatic irritations, emotional irritations, than those who are less materialistic. They watch more television, use more drugs and alcohol, and have more impoverished personal relationships. Even in sleep, their dreams seem to be infected with anxiety and distress. This reminds me of Futurama when they were projecting commercials into Fry's brain. And he went to the mall later. Anyway. Thus, insofar as people have adopted the American dream of stuffing their pockets, they seem to that extent to be emptier of self and soul. Perhaps even more important, Kasser provides one of the fullest explanations available of how these empty promises of consumerism can become deeply anchored in our psyches by culture. His explanation focuses not only on the play of macroeconomic forces that drive market consumerism, but on a closer-up view of what leads people to so persistently try psychologically to feed off of material goods and status symbols, even though they do not nourish. And you can see that in chapter 1. Down at the bottom there, he has this little thing here that talks about how it doesn't make people happy. Now on page 2, it says here, it seems whatever we inquire about the value of materialism, we receive conflicting answers. We can ask the government, but while politicians worry that popular consumer culture has displaced community and family values, economic considerations play an overwhelming central role in the decisions of most elected officials. Think about it. Remember, those of you, it's in the history books now, Bill Clinton ran on, his motto during the '92 election was, it's the economy, stupid. And I assure you, if Mitt Romney or any of these Republicans are going to unseat Obama, it's going to be because the economy is terrible, not because of gay marriage or contraception and stuff like that, even though those are important issues to a lot of people, right? Abortion. To conservatives and to religious people, and even to older liberals, these are very, very important issues in their mind. Like the definition of marriage. Well, it is. There's no doubt about it. When there's a recession, abortion and all these other issues go back here. But they always come up during the debates. And Rick Santorum can't seem to stop talking about some of these things. So, but anyway, let's start this documentary. And again, read chapter 2 for next time. Let's start this documentary. This is called Affluenza. I think you'll enjoy this. It was actually done by PBS. It's a little bit hokey. It's from 1997. There is this one part in here that I have to tell you about. This guy named Reverend, I think his name's Haggard or Taggart. This guy used to rail. He used to rail at the pulpit against homosexuality and drugs, and then they caught him a few months after he was doing these sermons with a male prostitute doing crystal meth. He went to rehab, supposedly not for the drugs, but for the homosexuality. And he came out 6 weeks later and said he was 100% cured. I'm not making this. You can't really. I mean, you could make this up, but people would call you on it. Okay. It's like a Hollywood story, but it's somebody's real life. But he's in this documentary, and they present him as like a credible person. And so just listen to the message, not the messenger. But I think his life and being caught like that, explains the difficulty of trying to be non-materialistic or attack materialism in a materialistic world. So. Like I said, it's a little older, it's a little bit of a caricature, but I think he makes some very good points. It certainly challenges what the mainstream media says about a lot of these things. Oh, and by the way, since we're watching this on YouTube, there'll probably be commercials. Here we go. All right.
The following program was made possible by a grant from the Pew Charitable.
And think about the reality of this being on PBS. Look, and there's a commercial at the bottom of it. Here, I'll move this.
When was this made?
1997. I should tell you that nobody's done a redo this.
Then why do I feel so awful, so bloated and sluggish?
Everybody, please.
Nothing gives me joy anymore. Not the house, the car, the clothes, the raise. Nothing. Doctor, I'm frightened. Well,
Alienates whites even more. I think also that a lot of people in general, not just white people in general, but one of the criticisms of the NBA is that it's a very self-centered game. It is a show-off sport. That you bounce around and you jump around and look at me and I'm going to shake my head in front of the camera and here's my team.